Looks like Prince Harry suddenly discovered that his biggest emotional trump card wasn't exactly enough to shake King Charles. And just like that, everything flipped. What many whispered was a brilliant pressure move suddenly started looking like a jaw-dropping miscalculation. Now, behind those polished palace walls and carefully crafted public statements, an even more explosive question is racing through royal circles. Did Harry finally push things too far? Because according to growing reports and endless speculation, a move many saw as connecting access to the king's grandchildren with unresolved and increasingly complicated security demands failed to spark sympathy inside the monarchy. Instead, it may have hardened positions even more. And if that's really the case, then what we're witnessing is no heartwarming reconciliation story. It's a royal showdown becoming more personal, more emotional, and more explosive than ever before.
Single time I've tried to do it privately, there have been briefings and leakings and planting of stories against me and my wife. The family motto is never complain, never explain. The correspondent. And that correspondent will literally be spoon-fed information and write the story. And at the bottom of it, they will say that they've reached out to Buckingham.
Just when everyone thought the drama from previous royal battles had finally settled down, another storm came crashing in. But this one hit differently. This wasn't about a television interview. It wasn't about a memoir. It wasn't about yet another headline blasting palace decisions. This time, the spotlight shifted to Harry's children, and the mere suggestion that their visits to Britain might depend on specific security guarantees instantly sparked controversy. Suddenly, what should have been a simple family issue turned into a symbol of something much bigger. A conflict involving trust, resentment, loyalty, and power. Because for many observers, the entire situation painted an uncomfortable picture. Grandchildren becoming tied to negotiations, family bonds getting tangled with official demands, personal relationships being swallowed by institutional disputes. And once that perception entered the public conversation, there was no ignoring it. What made the situation even more dramatic wasn't what King Charles said, but what he didn't say. There was no emotional rebuttal, no furious statement, no dramatic palace response, and no public plea for understanding. Instead, there was silence. Firm silence. Deliberate silence. The kind of silence that creates far more speculation than words ever could. Because throughout royal history, silence has never been empty. Silence is strategy. Silence is positioning. Silence is often a message hidden behind absence. And while Harry's concerns continued dominating headlines, the king appeared completely determined to let that silence do the talking. That silence immediately unleashed fresh theories. Was Charles refusing to reward pressure? Was he protecting the institution from looking vulnerable to emotional leverage? Or was he simply exhausted after years of public family warfare? Every possibility seemed believable. Every possibility carried consequences. And every day without a response only made the mystery even bigger, because the more people searched for signals, the more they started noticing something unusual. The palace wasn't reacting with emotion at all. In fact, it was acting as though the final outcome had already been settled. Meanwhile, critics pointed to a pattern that has seemingly followed Harry for years. Whenever tensions rise, private disagreements somehow manage to spill into the public spotlight. Interviews, documentaries, memoirs, media exclusives, and public narratives replacing private conversations. And whether fair or not, many royal insiders reportedly started viewing every fresh revelation through that very lens. Not as isolated incidents, but as pieces of a much larger game plan. A strategy where public sympathy becomes leverage. A strategy where public pressure turns into part of the negotiation. And if that's truly how some palace figures viewed recent developments, then Harry may have run into a wall far stronger than he ever expected. Then came another intriguing twist to the story, the debate surrounding media leaks. Because while anonymous sources have long dominated royal reporting, one particular incident from September 2024 continues drawing attention. At first glance, it appeared completely harmless. A warm birthday profile, a father speaking lovingly about his children, a positive image, nothing controversial. But one tiny detail changed everything. The comments reportedly came directly from Harry himself through email communication, not through a spokesperson, not through an unnamed friend. Directly. That detail became significant because it seemed to confirm what many observers had long suspected. Harry was perfectly willing to communicate personally whenever he wanted a specific message delivered. And once that realization entered public consciousness, people started revisiting old stories. Suddenly, Every anonymous quote looked different. Every conveniently timed article faced renewed scrutiny. Every emotionally detailed report sparked fresh questions. Were these independent leaks or carefully crafted narratives? Nobody could say for certain. But suspicion alone was enough to ignite yet another round of royal intrigue. The timing made the whole situation even more explosive. Harry's security battle had become one of the biggest disputes defining his relationship with Britain. He repeatedly argued that protection concerns affected not only him, but also his family. Yet palace representatives consistently stressed that security decisions belonged to official government structures, not personal royal intervention. In simple terms, the king couldn't just wave his hand and magically change the outcome. Legally, that explanation may have settled the issue, but emotionally it solved absolutely nothing, because emotions don't follow legal frameworks. Emotions follow perception, and that's exactly where the real battle shifted. Suddenly, the conversation was no longer about committees, protocols, or procedures. It became a story about a son feeling ignored, a father keeping his distance, a family trapped inside years of unresolved pain. And whenever public attention focuses on emotions, facts often take a back seat. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, another question reportedly loomed over palace discussions. If public sympathy couldn't influence official decisions, then what would happen next? Would Harry escalate? Would Charles soften? Or had both sides reached a point where neither was willing to make the first move? The uncertainty itself became part of the spectacle. Every delayed response felt significant. Every absence felt deliberate. Every quiet moment seemed packed with hidden meaning. What makes this saga even more dramatic is that the conflict no longer appears to revolve only around security, phone calls, or unanswered letters. According to the narrative taking shape around the royal family, the battle has become something far more symbolic. A test of influence. A test of who can shape public perception more effectively. And perhaps most importantly, a test of who is willing to survive the longest stretch of silence. Because while Harry's supporters insist he is simply fighting for his family's safety and trying to maintain ties with his father, critics increasingly see another picture. They see carefully timed stories, emotional revelations, and highly specific details emerging precisely when pressure on the monarchy is already reaching its peak. Whether that interpretation is fair or not, separating the personal drama from the public strategy has become nearly impossible. And then came the story that sent fresh shockwaves through royal watchers. The discussion surrounding an alleged inheritance clause linked to the wishes of the late Queen Elizabeth II. Suddenly, attention shifted away from current headlines and toward what was described as a final attempt to heal a family fracture that had been growing for years. According to the narrative, the clause represented something bigger than money. It represented unfinished business, a grandmother's last effort to prevent a permanent separation between generations. If true, it placed King Charles in an extraordinarily difficult position, because the choice before him was no longer simply political or constitutional. It became deeply emotional, a decision involving his mother, his son, his heir, and the future identity of the monarchy itself. The reported meeting between Charles and Prince William only added even more fuel to the speculation. If those reports are accurate, William's reaction was anything but enthusiastic. Years of tension, accusations, documentaries, interviews, and memoirs had left wounds that simply weren't easy to erase. For William, trust reportedly remained the missing piece. Courtesy could still exist. Formality could still exist. Even civility could survive, but trust, that was an entirely different story. And without trust, every effort at reconciliation becomes fragile. Every conversation becomes complicated. Every gesture becomes vulnerable to interpretation. At the same time, public opinion remained sharply divided. Some saw Harry as a man who walked away from royal privilege in search of personal freedom. Others viewed him as a prince who continued benefiting from royal connections while criticizing the institution that gave him worldwide fame. Those competing narratives created the perfect storm. No matter what Harry did, one side saw bravery while another saw manipulation. No matter what Charles did, one side saw strength while another saw coldness. It was a conflict where perception mattered almost as much as reality itself. Yet perhaps the most intriguing aspect of all was the never-ending pattern surrounding information. Biographies, interviews, streaming projects, legal disclosures, exclusive articles, and behind-the-scenes revelations had created an atmosphere where almost every development arrived wrapped in suspicion. And people no longer asked only whether a story was true. Now they asked why it surfaced, who benefited, who wanted it published, who gained sympathy, and who gained leverage. Those questions now seem to follow nearly every headline involving the Sussexes and the palace. And that brings everything back to the biggest mystery. If the reported strategy involving the children was meant to influence King Charles, then why didn't it work? The answer may be simpler than many people think. Because by this stage, the monarchy may see emotional pressure as something it simply cannot afford to reward. Every concession risks creating another expectation. Every public response risks creating another cycle. Every reaction risks inviting future escalation. If that's the thinking guiding the palace, then Charles's silence suddenly becomes easier to understand. It may not necessarily be indifference. It may actually be resistance. But silence carries consequences of its own because unanswered questions rarely disappear. They multiply. They grow. They inspire theories. And as the months continue passing, the gap between father and son risks being defined not by what was said, but by everything that remained unsaid. That's why this story continues captivating audiences around the world. It's no longer simply about royal titles, security disputes, inheritance discussions, or media narratives. It's about whether a family already fractured by years of public conflict can somehow find its way back from the brink.